Welcome to the Writers Are People Too podcast, where you might just find that you shouldn't meet the writer of your heroes. Tonight we have with us Meghan Turner. So thank you for coming on. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Hey, Matt. Thanks so much for having me. My name's Meghan Irene Turner. I've been writing poetry for about 10 years now, and I recently just published my first book with Choir. I'm super excited. I'm also an artist as well here in Northern California, so I do a lot of original artwork via digital art, illustrations, watercolors, and stuff like that.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, you mentioned you're from Northern California. I hail from Southern California in Santa Barbara. I actually live in Asheville, North Carolina now. But I was going over your website and I saw that you had an interesting life experience. You mentioned the campfire up there in Paradise. So tell me a little bit about what happened to you there.
Yeah. So for those of you who are not from California, you probably have heard a lot about the California wildfires that we've been having the past couple of years. But in 2018, I was living up in Paradise, California. It's a pretty small town. It's just in the Sierra Nevada foothills, right above a town called Chico, which is where I live now. And that entire town burned down in a matter of hours on November 8th, 2018. So I've relocated to Chico, but it's definitely been, quite the experience rebuilding everything, kind of starting over from scratch. Lost a lot of my early writing that I had. Some of my first publications burned down and all that. And actually, I'm from Southern California originally when I was younger and lived through the San Bernardino wildfires. So it was my second go around.
Yeah, I think some of us recall at the time seeing pictures floating around of Paradise just blackened and no structures standing. And then President Trump at the time saying, "Oh, yes, pleasant. Not a pleasant place to live," or something like that. I just got the name of the town wrong. So I remember him saying that. But you brought up an interesting point, which is like you lost a lot of your art and your writing. So how was that? Let's take that two questions. How was that for you as an artist mentally? Was that very defeating? And then also, how did you rebuild from that?
It was sort of a really interesting, formative time in general. Sort of like the entire landscape, and not just metaphorically, but literally. For a lot of us, it was like clean slate. It was starting all over again. And it's actually because of the fire why I started doing a lot of my digital illustrations. When I first came out of the fire, I didn't have any of my art supplies. I didn't have any of my canvases. I didn't have any of my brushes and my paints. But I still needed to create. So it became this thing where I could write poetry on my laptop and then I could accompany it with some kind of, simple illustration that I just had there with me. And it actually turned into what is now an entire book of art and poetry.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Yeah. Again, I came from Santa Barbara, California, and growing up, we had fires all the time. And like you'd wake up in the morning, there'd just be like thick ash all over your cars, and you'd smell it in your house. And then I remember this very surreal experience. I think it was 2008 or so. I remember the power had gone out in the city because of the fire, and so everything was dark down in the Goleta Valley. And you look up at the mountains, and everything is just red, glowing red. It's this hellish landscape, and so even though we were a safe distance away, it still is very eerie to understand that you could just be wiped off the face of the earth like happened to Paradise. And it's very, very tragic in so many ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in regard to your experience at the campfire, I saw a quote on your website and you said that you credit much of your resilience to the local art community. So how did the local art community, or perhaps just art in general, how did that strengthen you in your life?
Right out of the gate, I was so taken aback by just the amount of fortitude and resilience that the entire community showed. Within just a few months, there were so many groups that were forming. And in particular, within 6 months or so, the fire kind of fell into a group of local artists, songwriters, authors, and it was the anniversary after the fire. We put on a show up in Paradise called Joy Will Find a Way, which is a little hint of a Bruce Cockburn song, if anybody knows who that is. But it was all of these different people in the community coming together, poets that would read, poetry, writers who were sharing their stories. We did plays and stuff like that. It was like a 2.5 hour show. And that kind of started this entire alliance of people who said, okay, we need to have like a place where people can come and create. We might not have houses, but we need a place where we can all gather. And so we created a bunch of groups up on the ridge, as we call it, and that kind of took off from there, and they're still together today.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, it's always good to find a community in difficult times to help you through that, especially people who have experienced the same thing you have. And it definitely, it reminds me of the sense of community that America felt after, for example, 9/11. And I wish that we could all have that sort of community all the time instead of just waiting for something tragic to happen.
Absolutely. I agree 100%.
So now we come to your most recent poetry book. So correct me if I'm wrong, you've written 5 or so?
Yeah. So this will be my second technically book that has artwork incorporated into it. And this will be my first full compilation of artwork and poetry. But I have 5 other books of poetry, and then I did a children's novel as well.
Okay, let's pause and talk about that children's novel for a second. What was that about?
So that book, it's called The Cat and the King. And it's actually an environmental justice book. It's aimed at kids anywhere from the ages of like 7 to 10. And I originally wrote the storyline when I was in 4th grade. And my teacher at the time was a wonderful teacher, and she took the book and she, hard bound it for us. And I had done like my little illustrations in it, and we had kept it, throughout my life. And that was one of the things that I lost in the fire. So my goal was a couple years ago to recreate that, but write that story as an adult for children around that age. And then I was lucky enough to have a local illustrator help illustrate the whole thing with beautiful watercolors. And yeah, it was a really interesting. I have young kids, so it was really inspiring.
Okay. Yeah, I would love to be able to write a book for my daughter someday. She's 2 right now, and she loves her 2-year-old books, but I want to write something for her that she can understand a little bit more and communicate with her more when she's maybe like 5, 6, and then as she grows up. I would love to do that, so I'll put that on my to-do list. But I also like how you kind of came full circle, and like, I am now an adult writing this for kids, even though I was a kid when I came up with the idea. I think that's beautiful that you can communicate through art that way. It kind of does lead me into my next question, which is, you transitioned, or I don't know if you did poetry beforehand or after, but poetry seems to be your main, we'll call it, medium of art. So why did you choose poetry?
I started out reading as a young child. These little tiny books my grandmother would get in the mail of poetry. And it was kind of where I learned, and even like Mother Goose books, right? So my main inspiration of learning to write and read was from poetry. And then going through school, I did a lot of stuff that was aimed towards journalism. In fact, that's kind of where I started out in college, is intending to do some kind of journalism. But when it switched to the 24-hour news cycle, paper print was kind of a thing of the past. It kind of led me back down this path of creative writing. But a lot of my poetry is very much storytelling. I'm an observer, and I'm writing about what I'm seeing, what I'm experiencing. And so I kind of blended the two together. And then my love for music and lyrics also really kind of inspired me to understand a more creative approach to writing and describing.
Okay, awesome. So your most recent book that we're going to talk about, you titled Fire and Silk. Now, by chance, is this informed at all by your experiences during the campfire?
Absolutely. I think, right, that those are kind of two things that are in juxtaposition of each other, right? Silk is this very fragile thing. It's very soft, and it's usually something that we accompany with, a sense of comfort, a sense of beauty. And fire is something that is kind of ruthless, right? And all encompassing and harsh. And so I kind of wanted to have this experience of doing writing that's truthful and can touch on the light of things and the dark of things, because I think that's very much everybody's experience in life.
Thinking on that again, how difficult was it for you, or what was your experience having everything taken away and then having to start fresh, just in general, not even only with art?
You know, it's been sort of a blessing. I think it really does. I mean, I know that sounds sort of funny to say, and I've had a lot of people be like, how can you spin it like that? Um, but it genuinely was this experience that kind of let me lay the groundwork for a metamorphosis of myself too. I was in my late 20s when the fire happened, and it kind of was like this, where the two roads were diverging in life sort of a situation, and kind of letting go of everything, and especially not by choice. It just sort of pushes you out into making a choice. Where do I want to go? And you can kind of choose whatever. You're starting over again. So for me, it's been really good.
Yeah, clean slates always do that, whether it be moving across the country somewhere new or like starting a new job or something like that. But also like the adversity of losing all your things. Like I don't know the exact quotes, but I know there are quotes floating around that it's like adversity makes the man or woman. And so like going through difficult things really forms your character and makes you stronger, makes you able to climb taller mountains in the future. So what kinds of themes do you have then in your book, Fire and Silk?
I mean, a lot of it is based on this sort of learning process and experience, and most of my poems, I would say, are a narrative of my own experiences, but some of them are also, like I said, observations. But I do think that having had, several adversities in life, I certainly couldn't have written what I wrote, in this book 10, 15 years ago, no doubt. I think that kind of the experiences themselves are what lend to this deeper empathy with others, with myself. And so the book is essentially trying to encompass a lot of different elements of just growth.
Yeah. I hear that a lot, which is authors, they're like, I couldn't have written this book X years ago because I didn't have the experience in love or the experience in pain, just general life experience. And like, I think I've matured as a writer as well. If I look back at the books that I wrote or the stories that I wrote, in 2018, 19 versus a manuscript that I finished now. One of my alpha readers, he said that you've matured so much as a writer because you've been through those life experiences. So again, difficult things make for more well-rounded people, I guess we could say.
Absolutely.
But before we get into you reading an excerpt, tell me a little bit about publication. What's that been like for you?
Well, I think it's been really good. I've self-published for several years. So I've kind of had my experience there. And so my appreciation just for the entire, process of writing and editing and all of that has definitely grown and changed and evolved. And it's funny because I studied, throughout my graduate degree and undergraduate degree about different types of publishing, different types of publication. But until you're actually doing it, I just don't think you have any idea until you're knee deep into actually putting together your manuscript and really get into the grind of all that. But, it's been a fun process, and it's definitely a wonderful thing to have your book, published for sure.
What would you say is the most challenging thing about self-publishing?
I think self-publishing I think that a lot of times there's almost a limitlessness to it. So you don't necessarily get the feedback and the refinement that you can get when you're publishing, with a group or with an editor or with a publishing company. I think that it's great because it gives access, to people who wouldn't necessarily, outside of maybe vanity publishers, be able to actually pursue publication. But it's dangerous in the sense that there's just really no rules there. And I think that sometimes those are good to have as a writer, to kind of learn what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, yeah, I'd like to invite you to read an excerpt or a poem now.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and read a poem called The Orange Tree. This is actually the first poem in the book. And like I said, there will be images and illustrations in the books to accompany as well. So this is the orange tree. The tawny fruit, round and stubborn, fits perfectly into my misshapen palm. The zest is made bright by timing, reveals underneath it a healthy pulp. Amid the grove, here's the one I choose, once nothing more than an ivory blossom, now grown into the freshness of perfection, existing, seemingly, for my tongue and my lips, if nothing else to be held by my hands. Had I not plucked such a globe from the countless others that may render the same fruit but slightly different color, could it have fallen to the ground? And who am I to stop it from disintegrating or becoming a seed for the belly of the bird rather than an instant of pleasure in my world? Do I remove the peel, bite with intention, and savor the timing of its ripeness with the timing of my hunger? Or do I merely relish in the color of its marked skin, knowing that every purpose can exist all at once?
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. There's a round of applause for you.
Thank you.
Cool. Well, yeah. Any final comments before I let you go?
Like I said, this book is written for hopefully anyone who's experienced any form of life. Anybody who's read poetry in the past, you'll probably get little glimpses of references to other poets as well.
Okay, awesome. Well, there you have it, everybody. Meghan Irene Turner.
All right. Thanks so much, Matt.